Chuck Colson. We should seek to find the order God created. What's F? It's just the best that they've got is just koans, philosophy, speculation, turns of phrase. You're not looking for any kind of real answers. You're just looking for slogans. Atheistic. I spelled this like aesthetic, like where you have the... No, I spelled it A-E-T-H-E-I-S-T-I-C, atheistic. Worldview is pointless to study chaos. I like chaos. It's kind of its own... Chaos isn't as chaotic as you think it is. Christians see the world from a politicized or polemic perspective. Men can rule from the grave. Darwin is the founder. What scientist do you know goes, Darwin is the head of our religion and our president and our ruler? It's like, nobody is saying this stuff. And keep in mind, this is like going like this. They're presenting these arguments and moving on to the next thing before you can really digest them. And I'm just writing as fast as I can and going, yeah, I hear you. We deal in theory, especially with evolution. They treat the word theory in this context like it's on the same plane with every other theory that exists, and they like to promote their own views as a valid theory, as a scientific theory. It's like, you're not on the same plane at all. You do not have anywhere near the same level of research that evolution has on it. You don't have... I mean, you've got philosophical claims. You don't even have a hypothesis going here. Dawkins. Creationists are wicked and stupid. So far from my experience, after having left the church, and after having been in the church, I can tell you that, yep, Dawkins was right on that count. They go into the watchmaker's fallacy. I have my own take on the watchmaker's thing. You know how they say, like, okay, if you found some disassembled pieces of a watch, you know, they can't really come together. You'd have to have an intelligent person to put them together. What if you took, like, one little piece of the watch and, like, stuck it in the ground as, like, a vertical piece and just used it as a sundial? Because then it's still functional. And it doesn't take any interaction for you to make it work like a timepiece. They like to cherry pick quotes. They've got a quote here from Francis Crick. Isn't this the guy that said that, like, black people were less intelligent or something? He's like 90. When you say something is obvious, that's kind of a way to shut down a conversation. O.J. Simpson killed his wife. It's obvious. ISIS is the mark of the beast and bears the mark of the beast. It's obvious. 2 + 2 is 5. It's obvious. You're not really counting on any other information to back up your argument. You're just trying to end it there. It's kind of a conclusion. It's not really an argument itself. So when they say design is obvious, you're concluding something. You're not actually doing anything to back it up. They use the argument that complicated stuff means design. It's just naive. I wish I could articulate why it's naive. It's just kind of... I can't really pick any one scientific article to rebut that just because it's so wrong-headed. Okay, so with math, there's a lot of complicated math, but complicated doesn't mean it's designed, it just means it is because it can't be anything else. And they quote from Darwin, they talk about DNA. They try to use outliers. David Kenyon, proponent of chemical evolution, but changed his theory. Change means you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you figured out something that supersedes it. They like to pick the one guy who comes out and goes, you know, I was wrong about something, the cult was actually right the entire time. They go into irreducible complexity. It's like I keep reading stuff about like the structure of the eye, how it evolved from simpler stuff. I mean, the border between chemistry and biochemistry is just, you know, it's a blurry line. You get stuff like biomats, and you go from that to more complex organisms or parts of other complex organisms, and yeah, the difference between the two starts to get a lot harder to tell apart. It's just our understanding that's a lot less sophisticated than what we're looking at. And that's where the God of the Gaps thing comes in. And as our knowledge increases, God's role in that becomes a lot smaller. It just becomes more and more set aside. They mention a lack of intermediate varieties. The problem is that there's just not a lot of fossils. And, you know, the more that I've read articles on science, the more evolutionary intermediaries there are. It's just they presented all of this without having a real actual scientist there to go, well, here's, you know, here's what you're saying and here's the actual case. And they're saying this in 2007, and this is before we got even more evidence about the finches. They're saying the finches' beaks grow from generation to generation. After the drought ends, they turn back to normal. There is no net change. Well, what you're talking there is about environmental pressures, and the environmental pressures there aren't consistent. So what you're saying actually does confirm evolution. It doesn't debunk it. Bozar, Darwinism, again, equating scientific theory with a belief. Science isn't a belief, it's a study of reality. Darwinism makes Christ's sacrifice meaningless. They don't say why. People want to be free to follow their own desires. It takes away accountability. And of course the church is going to have a problem with this because they want people to be accountable and only to them. I don't know what date this is from. Dang it. Just they're stating in this thing, this is probably from the Vine, sharing emotions with others. Your concern should be more than for yourself. Your concern for others should be for more than yourself. Once again, you're not worth as much as other people are. You should be more concerned with them. Humbleness. Use your gifts for others. Again, don't use your gifts for yourself. You're not worth it. Do evil means not doing the above stuff. So if you don't follow what the church says, then you're doing evil. And God will be against you. You don't want to be against God, do you? That would be really bad. So be against the church and you're against God. October 25th, 2007. God is infinite except when he isn't. They say that God doesn't dwell in sinners, so there's a finite limit to the space that he does inhabit. Colossians 2, of course not the first 3 books of the Bible, because reasons. Christ contains all of the truth, attributes, and nature of God. (1600) Westminster Confession, done by the Catholic Church, you know, the not real Christians. Description of God is pure authoritative. Of course they want the authority. That gives them authority over other people, especially over people with more power than them. Clinical knowledge of Scripture is fine. John 5:39 through 41. They point to God. They point to Christ. You must go beyond and have a relationship with him. The relationship with Christ is one of these selling points of the church. They try to say, you know, they go to people who are alone and abandoned, emotionally vulnerable, and say, do you want to have a relationship with a real person? And they use this to sell the church to these poor people when really all they want is another servant, another person to bring them tithes. I mean, I could probably find it in the notes that I've got, even in the same sermon. Let me see. Well, not quite, but I found another verse, another quote later on. We must proclaim our focus on God, then fellowship. So you know how you wanted a relationship with Christ? Well, that's not so much as important as a focus on God. Fellowship is less important than a focus on God. We just use that to get you into the cult. It's not so important that we actually fulfill our promises. Philemon. So you take somebody who has nothing and you say to them, knowing Christ takes top priority. Sacrifice for him. That's what the real goal is here. Sacrifice for the church. For Christ. You're doing it for Christ, not really the church. Exodus, God's name is jealous. Jealousy, desire for someone else's stuff, and hatred for the owner. Well, we've already seen how much the church hates its members, and how little it thinks of them. See, the church really doesn't like it when someone else makes an ownership claim of their property, and the church treats its members as its property. After knowing God, we can start to understand ourselves. Again, the focus is not on you as an individual. It's part of the cult itself. Know the cult, not know yourself. 1 Peter 1:24 through 25, God's word is permanent, except when it isn't. Yeah, the Old Testament, well, it's not, it's been fulfilled. We don't have to worry about it anymore, except when we're going to go back to it again and again in sermons to prove a point, because the New Testament doesn't have all of the quote mining that we need for our sermons. Hebrews 4:12, God's word is a weapon and very accurate. That doesn't sound like terrorist threatening at all. Luke wrote Acts. It doesn't matter that there's no signature page for those documents. It's just, go by what we're saying. Use Jesus' existence as the key piece of evidence if someone doubts. Well, even that's on shaky footing. There's this weird obsession that Christianity has with perfection. And that the very idea that you need to be perfect. And of course, they're the ones that say that perfection is something to be desired to begin with, and then they set the standards for that perfection. Our conscience can be twisted. So don't trust yourself. You're not worth having the benefit of a doubt. You can't, your very self can't be trusted. Better go by someone else, like the church. Creepy. Christ is the groom. Be focused on your spouse. Anxiety is a lack of faith. Yeah, they actually said that the reason why you have anxiety isn't because of your own physiology. It's because you lack faith. God's plan is better than yours. You can't be trusted to do your own planning. This was with the college-age ministry, The Vine, October 21st, 2007. Women are like China. Hebrew for woman is soft. Hebrew for men is hard. Nothing offensive in either one of those things, any of those things. The rest of this is pretty disgusting. I don't think I really need to reiterate it. Men fear domination, inadequacy. It's just, they're assuming that all these things are only, they only pertain to men. They're not citing anything to back up what it is that they're saying. A woman is to be a completer, a helper, a counterpart, a complementer. They are to be a balance. It's just so messed up. October 14th, 2007. Rejoice. Philemon. It could either be Philippians or Philemon. Probably Philippians. 4, verse 4. It is a commandment. Rejoice, or else. Philippians or Philemon 4 verse 6. Worry means you are self-dependent, and they don't want that. They don't want you to be dependent on yourself. They want you to be dependent on the cult, dependent on Christ, dependent on the church's resources. They don't want you to have any of that, because it means you control yourself and your finances, and they want control over your finances because it means they get a cut. Your focus should be on Christ. Dwell on Christ. So if you're not thinking all day long, Christ, 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 then you're a bad person and you're not a real Christian. Acts 5, 40 and 41. Suffering in Jesus' name is a blessing. How many people do you know that... No, I'm not going to phrase it like that. Christians aren't being persecuted. It's just fake. People like to chalk up their suffering to suffering for Christ. That's a lot different, though. First Peter 2:13-25. This is with the vine again. In the shadow of the cross, we must submit. Put yourselves under authority. We follow Christ's authority. Obey, obey, obey. What kind of personal relationship is this? I know there's like master and slave relationships, but this is just, this is a creepy version of that. Arrogance, pride, stubbornness leads to decentralized authority. Oh no, not decentralized authority. See, if you believe in decentralized authority, then you're arrogant and proud and stubborn. You don't want to be any of those things because we said that those things were bad. Peter submitted to bad governments. Jesus submitted to death. We should. All of this, submit to authority, submit to government, this is coming from people who want to control the government. So naturally, once you control the government, you want people to submit to it. And these people knew that one day that they would be getting more control of the government. They got it. And so now they want to guilt trip people into obeying instead of resisting. Place yourself under someone voluntarily. Submit for God's sake. Peter never spoke out against the government. So basically just everything that they're saying is meant to turn you into a bootlicker. God ordains government office. Good grief. This is from October 10th, 2007. I don't know exactly what virtue signaling is, but I'm pretty sure I'm looking at it. Human life is devalued when you go by science. We are no different than animals because we are all material creatures. What they omit to mention is that it's important to take care of animals. And you don't like that in Christianity because you're supposed to dominate the earth. And you're supposed to be a steward of the earth, but you're not actually supposed to care as much about the earth as you are about furthering the agenda of the church. Man can focus on self-centered desires. His goal is survival. Once again, just signaling it is bad virtue to take care of yourself. You're supposed to take care of the church's goals first. Self-actualization, desires are the pinnacle. It's bad to take care of your desires. Romans 8:13, sin brings death. It's not cancer, it's just sin. Selfishness is ingrained in culture. What they're doing there is saying that, well, we're not a part of culture. I thought you said America was a Christian nation. Well, no, because we're being persecuted. Sure. You're not being persecuted, you're just not being allowed to persecute others. God gave us free will so that blah blah blah. No. Nowhere in the New Testament is there any indication of free will. October 6, 2007. I don't know if there's going to be anything I can pull from these notes. God saves us for the purpose of saving others. So really, it's not because he wanted you, it's because he wanted to save other people. Again, devaluing the individual. Don't spend labor on empty worldly satisfaction. Spend it on the cult, on the church. No matter how good you think it will be, worldly satisfaction will disappoint you. You're sure you're not trying to influence our enjoyment of that stuff by saying that you ought to be feeling bad even if you're not? Your happiness is found in God, who wants you to be happy in Him. So the only time you're allowed to be legitimately happy is if you're happy in God, is if you're busy doing cult stuff. Listen to God or your soul will die. Listen and your soul will live. Terroristic threatening. October 5th, 2007. Infidels are God's enemies. Well, that's a problem. Especially when you consider that Christians are supposed to be a small portion of America. This poor, persecuted, isolated group of people apart from the world, and then everybody else is their enemies. I mean, that doesn't sound like radicalization to you at all. Like, it sounds like you're making... I mean, this is how terrorist groups get started. God deserves glory, so ignoring him is a sin. It's just the language used. It just sounds so... nuts. Fringe, alien, kookish. Jesus became the substitute focus for God's wrath. So you're saying that God punished an innocent person and he's supposed to be completely just God? That makes a lot of sense. Punishing an innocent person for a guilty person's crime? That sounds like justice. Alright, I gotta stop it here.